morning, my friend. I hope you had a good weekend. It's raining here. This is another kind of different type of topic. I want to talk about something called metathesiophobia. Well, when I say phobia, you probably know that is fear, right? And in so many of the discussions about overcoming our fears, especially in the self-help industry or, the so-called gurus and coaches that are on the internet saying, oh, you need to overcome your fears. Well, that may be true to a certain degree, but we've got to be careful. Fears are what keep us from walking into fire or jumping off a 10-story building. Those fears you probably don't want to lose, because the result of that, well, can really put you in a bad place or, end your life entirely. So when we talk about fear, though, we should understand that we have this thing called the limbic system in our brain, and it's a bunch of different neural pathways around where the amygdala would be the primary source of the experience of fear. And then there are other elements, other parts of the brain, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and others that kick in to kind of help us regulate in terms of how big of a threat something is. I mean, naturally, we probably shouldn't fear unicorns, rainbows, or lollipops, but each of those could be dangerous. Well, unicorns don't really exist, but if you are seeing them, it could be something of a deeper problem. The other is, rainbows. Well, we get rainbows when it rains, and it's raining here right now. And there's, a possibility that where there's rain, there could be lightning. Then, of course, the odds of being hit by lightning are pretty minuscule. And of course, lollipops, unless you're a toddler, they're not that dangerous. I mean, toddlers have been known to get them lodged in their throat and it stops them from breathing. You see, everything has an element of fear. It's important that we put that in perspective. William Shakespeare said, either good or bad, thinking makes it so. Well, yes, to a degree, that would probably be an accurate statement. But if we believe that unicorns, rainbows, and lollipops are something to be afraid of versus a wild animal or, again, walking into a fire or jumping off a building, you see how this whole system kind of regulates that. And that's probably a good thing. And if it doesn't do a good job of that, well, you don't live very long. But we've been around for technically millions of years. For modern man, maybe 200,000 to 300,000 years. And this is a deep wired part of our brains that has kept our species alive for, well, those millions of years that they've been talking about. See, it's about the perception of our fears. There are some things that perhaps we could overcome that would benefit us. If we're in the business world and we wanted to create a name for ourselves, well, we may end up having to do some public speaking. Believe it or not, public speaking has a higher fear factor than death itself. Figure that one out. I'm just glad I don't have a fear of coffee. But of course, there are other common fears that we face. We talk about fear of the unknown, or we talk about the fear of change. Simon Sinek recently talked about people aren't afraid of change. Well, yes and no. We don't fear change necessarily itself if that change is, hey, you just won the lotto, $500 million. But then again, once you get that money, you may find fears that you never had before. We do fear, though, the unknown, the unpredictable. These things do scare us a bit because we don't know if we're prepared to handle them. And that kind of makes sense. Another element of that is fearing a loss of control. because oftentimes that uncertainty or that fear of the unknown, when we really process it, it's the fact that we don't feel that we're in control. And if you remember last week's Monday Morning Cup of Joe, we talked about control being an element of, well, happiness. If we don't feel a sense of control over our life, we are going to be fearful. We've got to bear in mind that fear is a chemical cocktail in our brains. So we have to stop when we experience it and say, is this a rational fear or is it an irrational fear? Sometimes fearing the unknown, probably one of the most common, is not life ending, although we perceive it and experience it as that, which is wild, but it's real. So if we want to overcome fears, we have to say, A, is it going to kill me? B, is it something that I can survive? And C, is there a benefit if I go beyond my fear and accomplish that public speaking engagement? You see, fear shows up when we leave our comfort zone. And again, there's a rational side of that comfort zone and there's an irrational side of that comfort zone. The rational side is I'm leaving my comfort zone by going into a jungle that's known to have, venomous snakes, spiders, and animals that would kind of see me as a meal. The other side of the irrational, potentially irrational, is to say, I'm afraid of something bad happening to me, so I'm going to stay in my bed for the rest of my life. What are you going to do? You can't stay in your bed your entire life. You'd be missing out on an incredible experience that life is. And then, of course, lastly, a lot of us fear failure. This is probably one of the biggest fears that we need to get over. We are going to fail, unless, of course, it's in skydiving or rock climbing or dangerous activities. But, we haven't really failed until we quit. So if there are things that you want to do, but you run into challenges, don't fear failure. Failure is a part of growth. It's a part of learning. And when we learn by our failures, the more failures we have, the less opportunity there is for us to fail in the future. Look at Thomas Edison. What do you say? I never failed. I just found out 10,000 different ways in which a light bulb would not work. That's the perspective that we need to have. We need to take a look at what we want to accomplish, assess the real threat, and identify whether it's only a perceived threat, move through it, and grow and enjoy our lives and allow those failures to enrich in us and find value in it. So again, fear is an important part of our neurology. It helps us identify when things are going to be life-ending or life-threatening. And we need that. But sometimes it gets overactive and it tells us things that are not necessarily true. Like if I go up on that stage and give a public speaking address, I'm going to die. I know I've felt that way before, but I've given hundreds of public speaking events since then, and it's not a big deal. As a matter of fact, it's a great experience, especially when we get some audience interaction. So strange as it may sound, that is today's Monday Morning Cup of Joe. Now, the reason being is that we never got an owner's manual for this slab of meat between our ears called our brain. And if we knew better about how the brain functioned and why it functioned the way it did, we might be able to make better decisions and live a far more fulfilling life. That being said, my friend, I will see you on Wednesday for After the Coffee. And as always, lead well.